Philippine PEFTOKs assaults at Hills Yoke and Old Baldi. The hidden battle time overlooked. Imagine being told to take two hills that nobody else could hold, not just for a day, but for good. Hills where the enemy was dug in so deep they practically owned the very rock. Now picture yourself outnumbered 10 to 1, maybe even more, with the kind of cold that gnaws at your bones, turning your trigger finger numb with frostbite. Your ammo down to the last 2 magazines, barely enough for a skirmish, let alone a full-blown assault. That wasn't some nightmare scenario. That was Tuesday, June 1952, for 46 young men from Luzon, the Philippines. They were just boys, really, but on those frozen, unforgiving slopes, they became legends. Legends whose names and the names of the hills they fought for, the world still largely can't recall. This is their story, a hidden battle, a time overlooked. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Front. The Korean War, often called the Forgotten War, was already 18 months old, a brutal, grinding stalemate. The front lines weren't some grand, sweeping plains. They were stuck stubbornly in the jagged, unforgiving hills east of the Imjin River. Chinese divisions, hardened by years of conflict, had dug into every crest, every strategic knob of earth, creating a defensive labyrinth. On UN artillery maps, 2 of these formidable strongholds stood out: Hill Yoke and Old Baldi. They weren't just random bumps on a map. They were critical choke points. Between them snaked a narrow, treacherous ridge, a lifeline that directed every single supply road for 15 grueling kilometers. In this kind of warfare, whoever owned that ridge truly owned the night, controlling the flow of everything from ammunition to rations and dictating the pace of battle. By June 1952, the UN command knew something had to give. The order came down, hushed and urgent: send a company-sized force, keep it quiet, and for God's sakes, take both peaks before dawn. A mission that on paper seemed utterly suicidal. The only unit available, the only one deemed capable, or perhaps desperate enough, was the Philippine 10th Battalion Combat Team, BCT. But even they weren't at full strength. After months of relentless patrolling, constant skirmishes, and the ceaseless attrition of mountain warfare, the BCT had been whittled down to a single reinforced rifle company. Their numbers were painfully few. They mustered a mere 46 rifles, 2 light machine guns, 1 radio with a cracked handset that barely whispered across the airwaves, and a borrowed American forward observer. This seasoned American, having seen his share of combat, openly admitted he'd never seen Filipino troops fight. There was a subtle skepticism, a quiet doubt in his eyes. Their captain, a man named Conrado Yap, was no career military man. Before the war, he was a school teacher, shaping young minds, not leading them into the jaws of hell. But under his command, these 46 men were more than just soldiers. They were brothers. He looked at them, his face etched with the weight of the impossible task ahead, and simply told them, "We write our own report card tomorrow." It was a quiet declaration, a promise of accountability, not to superiors, but to themselves and to each other. What they accomplished that night, a feat of incredible heroism and tenacity, would become a whisper in the annals of military history, confined largely to a forgotten battalion diary for 70 long years. The world moved on, but their story, their sacrifice, waited patiently for its moment in the light. Chapter 2. The Climb. At precisely 21:17, under a sky where the moon was swallowed whole by April dust storms, they stepped off. The air bit deep, the temperature hovering just above freezing, each ragged breath a white pennant unfurling in the oppressive darkness. For the first kilometer, they moved like ghosts, following the serpentine path of a dry creek bed. Their boots, painstakingly muffled with rice straw wraps, made no sound against the loose gravel. Not a single stone was allowed to speak and betray their presence. Corporal Emilio Gatas, the point man, moved with the quiet grace of a hunter. He carried only his M1 rifle and a bolo knife, a tool he'd wielded with deadly familiarity since the desperate days of Bataan. a silent testament to his prior battles and unyielding spirit. This wasn't just a weapon, it was an extension of his will. The column reached the saddle, the treacherous dip between their two objectives, Yoke and Baldy. Suddenly, the night tore open. Chinese mortar crews on Yoke, alerted by some unseen cue, unleashed a barrage of parachute flares. The hillside, moments before a canvas of impenetrable black, erupted into a blinding, sickly green noon. Every shadow danced, stark and menacing. The company froze, dropping instantly, faces pressed into the frozen dirt, muscles tense, waiting for the inevitable shrapnel song, the deadly whine of incoming shells. But none came. The shells overshot them, landing harmlessly beyond them. Captain Yap, his voice a low, urgent whisper that cut through the sudden silence, understood. "They're guessing," he breathed. "Keep guessing." It was a small victory, a moment of psychological advantage in a night of unknowns. They climbed on, driven by an unshakable resolve. Hands already raw began to bleed on the frozen, jagged rock, leaving smears against the earth. Lungs burned with the effort, each gasp a desperate plea for air in the thin, cold atmosphere. The physical toll was immense, but the mental fortitude was even greater. By 2340, just over 2 hours after they began, they were stacked silently below the Yoke crest, huddled in a trench the Chinese had carelessly, almost unbelievably, left unmanned. It was a gift from the gods of war. Private First Class Alberto Santos, ever the scout, slipped ahead, a shadow among shadows. He counted 15 enemy silhouettes against the ominous skyline, their forms stark and clear in the residual flare light. He rolled back, his report concise, chilling. "Fixed bayonets, sir. They're cold, too." The implication was clear. The enemy was ready, but also vulnerable. The assault, they knew, couldn't involve a single gunshot. A rifle crack, no matter how faint, could wake the entire mountain, bringing down an avalanche of Chinese defenders. This would be a silent, brutal dance of knives and fists, a desperate gamble for survival.
Chapter 3. Hill Yoke. At the stroke of 03, under the watchful, indifferent gaze of the Korean night, the Filipinos went over the top. No shouts, no war cries, just a silent, deadly surge. 12 seconds later, the trench exploded. Mandarin shouts ripped through the air, guttural and surprised. Muzzle flashes from the few Chinese guards who reacted pulsed in the darkness, momentarily illuminating the metallic clack of bayonets meeting sternums, the grim ballet of close-quarters combat. Corporal Gatus, the point man, found himself chest to chest with a Chinese sergeant, a formidable opponent who outweighed him by a good 30 pounds. There was no time for finesse, only primal instinct. Gatus butted the man's nose with his helmet, a sickening crunch, then drove his bolo knife with practiced precision under the chin strap. The sergeant's radio, still crackling with frantic coordinates for a mortar barrage that would never come, slid into the mud, its signal abruptly silenced. Within 5 brutal minutes, the trench, a strategic foothold, belonged to the Philippines. 9 dazed, disoriented enemies surrendered, their hands trembling violently, more from the pervasive cold than from immediate fear. The cost for this swift, decisive victory was measured in blood. 2 Filipinos wounded, 1 missing, vanished into the chaos. But they had captured something vital, a Maxim heavy machine gun, its water jacket frozen solid, rendering it useless for the moment. It was a powerful weapon, but now it needed to be turned, aimed at the enemy before the inevitable counterattack. Armorer Valeriano Abello, a man whose hands usually fixed delicate mechanisms, now used the butt of his rifle with brutal efficiency, smashing the ice from the gun. He fed a fresh belt of ammunition, cranked the traverse, just as the first Chinese platoon came charging up the reverse slope, a wave of dark silhouettes against the faint horizon. He fired 3 short, controlled bursts, thump, thump, thump. Then, as often happens in the crucible of battle, the ancient gun jammed. But the sound alone, the sudden, unexpected roar was enough. The Chinese assault stalled. Silhouettes dove for cover, buying the company the precious 5 minutes it desperately needed to reorganize, to catch their breath, to prepare for the next wave. By 0120, Hill Yoke was officially secured. The radio, still crackling faintly, carried the whispered code into the night. Basket secure. a small, weary triumph. But the grim reality remained. Total ammunition left, roughly 60 rounds per man. And ahead, looming in the darkness, lay Old Baldi, 400 meters of open, exposed ridge, now eerily lit by burning grass, a beacon of the battles yet to come.
Chapter 4. Hill Old Baldi. With Hill Yoke secured, Captain Yap made a hard call. He left 4 men to hold the newly conquered peak, a skeleton crew, but all he could spare, and led the rest across the saddle at 0140. The Chinese, now fully awake and enraged, had found their range. Explosions walked the ridgeline, a terrifying rhythmic percussion like impatient giants pounding the earth. PFC Rodrigo Aquino, the company runner, bore a unique and grim burden. He carried the only stretcher, a makeshift affair of 2 ponchos and bamboo poles. The medics, crucial as they were, had been left behind for the sake of stealth. Halfway across that exposed ridge, shrapnel, hot and jagged, sliced into Aquino's calf. He stumbled but refused to fall, hobbling onward, his teeth gritted, refusing to drop the litter that, in the brutal calculus of that night, nobody had time to use anyway. His personal pain was secondary to the mission. On Baldy's lower slope, they hit another wall, a belt of concertina wire, thick and unforgiving. There were no Bangalore torpedoes, no wire cutters. Again, Corporal Gagatos, the quiet hero of the bolo, stepped forward. He crawled, inch by agonizing inch, pressing his knife between the wicked spikes, twisting slowly, snapping one strand at a time. His cheek rested on the frozen earth, the cold seeping into his very bones, while flares popped overhead, illuminating his desperate, meticulous work. The wire eventually yielded a man-sized hole, barely large enough for the exhausted company to worm through, one by one, into the enemy's inner perimeter. By 2:30, they were stacked silently below the final bunkers, grimly aware that the hardest part was yet to come. Intelligence had estimated a mere squad defending this position. What they found was a reinforced platoon dug into timber bunkers with overlapping fields of fire, a deadly network of interlocking kill zones. Yap's solution was blunt, born of necessity and desperation. Fix them with grenades, then rush. He tapped Santos on the shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of his bravery and skill, point, privilege. Santos, without hesitation, pulled the pins on 2 Mk2 grenades, counted the agonizing seconds, and lobbed them with practiced precision. Twin flashes erupted, lighting the trench in a blinding, instantaneous inferno. Shards of rock and frozen flesh rained down. The charge went in. It was a brutal, visceral fight, bunker to bunker, a terrifying close-quarters dance of death. Sometimes, 2 rifles poked through the same firing slit, desperate to find a target. In one bunker, a wounded Chinese lieutenant, in a final act of defiance, hurled a potato masher grenade back. It exploded between him and Private Mateo Lagman, killing both instantly. Lagman's body, a tragic, heroic shield, plugged the embrasure just long enough for Corporal Pedro Baleao to swing around the rear and pitch a grenade inside, silencing the bunker forever. At 0312, Captain Yap, his face grimy and weary, keyed his handset twice, the prearranged signal for objective seized. The only reply was static. The radio battery had frozen, cutting them off. They were on their own, holding 2 hills in the heart of enemy territory, with no backup, no communication, just the chilling silence of their isolation. Chapter 5. The Cost. Dawn, a cold, indifferent gray, bled over the ridge at 0548. The company, exhausted but defiant, began the grim task of counting bodies. They held both hills, a testament to their impossible courage.
They had captured 2 heavy machine guns, 3 light mortars, 47 rifles, a significant haul of enemy firepower. And crucially, a stack of documents, later translated, revealed Chinese night firing tables for Seoul, providing invaluable intelligence. But victory always came with a price, and their own butcher's bill was heavy. 6 brave men dead, 14 wounded, 1 still missing, swallowed by the night. Ammunition, their lifeblood, averaged a mere 9 rounds per man. They were vulnerable, exposed, and surrounded. As the sun began its slow ascent, Chinese loudspeakers 2 kilometers away crackled to life, their chilling message echoing across the valley. Annihilation at sunrise. It was a psychological war, designed to break their spirit, to make them abandon their hard-won ground. But it never came. Instead, a different sound reached them. The rumble of engines, growing steadily louder. American tanks, their advance guided by a scout plane that had spotted the distinctive Philippine sun patch on a poncho left out as a marker, rumbled up the valley road, a site of salvation. They relieved the exhausted Filipinos at 0900. The tankers, incredulous at the feat, asked who had called for fire support during the night, wondering how such an assault could succeed without it. Captain Yap, his voice hoarse but with a flicker of his old wit, simply answered, "We didn't call, we just cursed." The men, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion, laughed. They laughed until tears, born of relief and sorrow, froze on their lashes. Back at the battalion aid station, the medics noticed something remarkable, a detail that spoke volumes about the men they were treating. Every wounded Filipino still clutched either his rifle or his bayonet. Not a single man had dropped his weapon, even in the throes of agony. General Van Fleet, touring the front lines the next day, personally sought out Captain Yap. He shook his hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and respect, and muttered, "I never doubted, but I never expected." It was high praise, understated, but profound. Yet back home, the newspapers, caught up in the mundane, buried the story under baseball scores. History books, focused on larger narratives, forgot entirely. The heroism of these 46 men, their impossible victory, was relegated to a footnote, a hidden chapter in a forgotten war. If you believe stories like this, tales of forgotten courage and impossible odds, deserve to see the light of day, then please hit that like button. It's how the algorithm learns that true bravery is still currency, still something worth sharing. Subscribe and ring that bell. Every single view, every comment, every share keeps a veteran's memory alive one more day. We owe them that much. And hey, comment below with the name of a forgotten hero you know, Filipino or not, and let's crowdsource their place in the books our kids will read, the stories they deserve to hear. Let's make sure no more heroes are left behind. Chapter 6: The Legacy. The assaults on Hills, Yoke, and Old Baldi never earned a ticker tape parade, never graced the front pages of international newspapers. There were no grand ceremonies, no shiny ribbons for these specific actions. Yet their triumph that brutal night plugged the gaping hole in the UN line, a critical breach that could have unraveled the entire spring offensive of 1952. Those 46 men, outnumbered tenfold, proved beyond any doubt that small nations, when their sons decide the price of freedom and honor is acceptable, can indeed swing big history. They carved 2 strategic hills into eternity, etching their bravery onto the very landscape of Korea, and then simply walked down, not waiting for applause, not seeking recognition. Their silence, their humble return to duty, isn't a sign of insignificance. No, their silence is our cue to speak. It's our responsibility to remember, to tell their story, to ensure that the Filipino soldiers of PEFTOK, who fought with such ferocity and patriotism, are finally given the place they so rightly earned in the annals of courage. Thank you so much for subscribing, liking, and commenting on our videos. God bless us all.